being a plein-air artist on occasion myself, how many hours, days over the year did you draw up here and paint? I'm just curious.
Yeah. I did about 38 paintings and ended up using 35 of them, and each of them took about 3 to 5 hours, and I did them all in one session. So, that gives you some idea. I went up every month, other than in really deep winter, and I probably went up about 40 times. Yeah, and as you know, as a plein air painter, plein air means painting outside. You only have a window of about 4 hours because you're dependent on the light staying as much as it's ever going to stay. But if it shifts completely, you've lost your composition. So it has a kind of natural time limit. So I would try to do, if I only went up once, I would try to do 2 paintings, a morning and an afternoon painting. Maybe 3 in a day, but that was pushing it. Anybody else?
I'm very interested in nature as text or as sacred text. As Cami was speaking about, and the conversation that we hear back from nature. So that's a huge question, but the idea that as we listen attentively or look attentively, that we are changed. And I just wonder if any of the artists would like to say anything more about that.
Well, absolutely. Although the first thing that pops into my mind is more the story of my experience with the cedar waxwing, which didn't happen in this Apple project. So there's 2 aspects to your question. One is literally hearing, and I've only had a few experiences of that. And I think I'll just table that for a moment. But the other is this notion of the landscape working on you. And so I did have this experience of kind of walking along and ruminating and worried about about climate change. And as I'm thinking about this conversation I'm having with someone, but I'm walking along, not at all relating to where I am, suddenly I was surrounded by about 1,000 cedar waxwings. And if you're not familiar with their call, it's a single trill. So if you multiply that by 1,000, you can imagine the level of vibrancy, of the vibration of that. And so I just had one of those experiences of sort of dissolving into the land, of everything being one, me, the waxwing, and the land. But I bring this up in answer to your question in the sense that of that, how a perceptual shift can change you or work on you. And so we live very distracted lives, and no matter what now, there'll be a single cedar waxwing, and I'm so familiar with that call that even I might be mid-conversation with someone, which is how we usually conduct ourselves distracted, and that call penetrates, and I'll go, cedar waxwing. So it's just a small example of, it's related to what Susan was saying, but that having this long period of attentive awareness does work back on you and shift how you experience.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking as Cami was talking that as a painter, and we all have really specific disciplines. I mean, visual art is quite subdivided into disciplines, and so what I do as a painter is very different from how maybe Brian or Gowri or Cami approach project. I mean, I think there are very strong things that unite us, but we have different disciplines that we're coming from. And I think as a painter, when I'm standing out there painting from observation, it's not like I'm not having this spiritual catharsis because I'm so busy trying to analyze what I'm seeing. It's like I'm trying to create a painting, and it's a slower, I'd say, the relationship builds more slowly than that, and I think that's why you see that painters often develop very strong relationships with specific places. They tend to be, we tend to know them for their relationships with the region, with the place, rather than as landscape painters per se. When we think of particular really strong landscape painters, a place comes up. And I think that's one of the gifts of this, was that over time, that going back and back and back, you get to know that one place. And so hopefully by it kind of coming through your senses and getting down on canvas, that communicates something about that place to others, and maybe starts to build a kind of mythology. Like we talked a lot about how artists, we were talking about Frost, like Frost was not a New Englander. He came from California, and yet he became New England for us. It's like that, he created a mythology. And I think if an artist devotes enough time to examining place, maybe that can also happen, is that it starts to shift the public's perception of that place.
I have a question about the role of artists and or the role of the artist for political reasons of our climate change and our environment, what we're dealing with now. What is our role? Should we be loud and shouting? Should we be quiet? Is it part of our work? Take it, Brian.
Take this one. Should we be loud? Yeah, absolutely. So I think, it's not that, I don't think the artist should feel like, I don't think any artist should feel compelled to have to turn what you're doing into always having a message. But I think also artists have a unique skill set where they can translate scientific information into these different formats that are very relatable and engageable by a broader public. So I do personally feel a responsibility to kind of express things that I'm thinking about and concerned about through my work in a lot of different ways. Again, I would never say that if you're not doing that as an artist, you're failing something. But it's interesting. I talk to a lot of scientists in my projects when I'm doing research, and I was talking to a guy from NCAR, and he said that scientists have profoundly failed to convincingly convince the general public that climate change is real and a huge problem. And that, I think artists can have a role in helping shift that balance. Again, I don't think we have to, but I think, if you choose to be that kind of artist, shout as loud as you possibly can. Absolutely. I think it's going to take all the tools from all different disciplines to really engage the public on a level that will affect change in the way that we need to.
One thought, as I think one of the tricky things about this show was art doesn't really get created in a very strong way from an agenda. It's just not the nature of it to respond to kind of illustrating an idea, and so, I know myself as a painter, I can find real beauty in a strip mall, if the light's right. I'm very happy to paint that strip mall. So I do agree with what Brian is saying, but I don't think fine art necessarily can carry that freight. I think maybe in other aspects of our life, maybe we can do that, but I'm not sure how much the weight of that can go on the back of fine art. I think there may be deeper things that fine art can awaken that might make people more sensitive, as Brian, carry that message better than science seems to be doing now. Not sure. It's complicated.
Can I speak to that? I actually think it is an ecosystem of doers and feelers and actors and shouters and quietly pursuing philosophical understanding or existential questions. I think it's the ecosystem part is that it's all dynamically, it's all of us all together collectively. So an example of shouting might be art in an activist setting, and an example of quiet might be what I've done this year is explore the ideas. So mine's more like visual philosophy, of the ideas of reductionist thinking, and where has that left us, and how do I reweave together the inner and the outer, and intuitive and analytic, and so I hope that, and I'm sort of counting on when I pull out of, for example, loud or art activist and community work with a particular climate change message, which I've done a lot of. I'm hoping that those quieter clarifications also have their place, both literally in the sharing of ideas, but possibly even energetically.
Just going to add something to that. I think it's not only limited to artwork that's shown in galleries, and we make art as fine artists, and then we show that work in a gallery, and people understand that message, but it can be taken out into the public, and we can pass that message on and convey our ideas and messages through participatory art and through community art and through teaching, and there's so much that's about art that isn't about going into a gallery or a museum. So there are other ways as well in which we can be loud, but in subtle ways, and very powerful ways.
Sorry, I just have to, I completely agree with that. I mean, again, like creating an artwork, and I think I need to qualify shouting as an artist. I don't mean, getting up there and punching it and screaming. I mean, I think the quiet works are often the most powerful. But I think just being engaged on a variety of different levels, and education, participation, all this kind of things, all the roles that artists take now in the world, just participating, not considering it, not thinking about it as an isolated discipline, because it's not, and it never has been. So.
Exactly. In fact, I think that anything that brings us to whole systems awareness is the radical paradigm shift that's going to really help. So the more that we are understanding our kind of radical mutuality, our interdependence, our inter-influencing whole systems aesthetics and whole systems thinking, and so that it's dynamically interrelated, that is the shift that's going to help.
I'm just connecting this whole panel with previous presentation a little bit. In times of crisis, and thinking back to the 1930s, how institutions sometimes stretch themselves to create venues where art can be useful. Mm-hmm. And I see a little bit of an analogy, if you will, between the 30s and today, and in this project, in a way, to thinking of the farm security photographers, creating who would ever think that the Department of Agriculture would be employing, all these sort of pioneer photographers. So I guess my question may be more to Tom, or I don't know if anyone's here from the Land Trust, but it's interesting that this is another case of your sponsors, if you will, the institutions that are creating this broader public venue, stretching themselves to engage artists.
Yeah.
I'll take a quick crack at that. The FSA conversation from this morning was part of a broad documentary tradition in the 1930s, not just the federal government taking pictures. And some of what we talked about, the confusions that left and right didn't seem to know what they were doing with those images, and sometimes they're used to push an agenda, sometimes less so, conflicting agendas. And there's a phrase, Susan, you used this earlier in the project, maybe a year ago, when we were talking about how much freight can you ask art to carry? How much freight can you ask art to carry? And I think from an institutional standpoint, we don't think of it as value added to the agenda. We think it is the agenda. So I sometimes think when you install an exhibition, if it works without the labels, you know you've done it well. Now, I also recognize that there are a variety of artists here, and you mentioned disciplinary traditions are very specific as well. A painter may feel differently about carrying message and carrying freight because there's a whole background to what we expect of a modern painter, and we measure ourselves against that in bibliography. But I don't think that we are asking artists or art to serve an agenda so much as to be the agenda. Is that an answer?
I'm on the board of the Land Trust, so I can talk a little bit from that, which was, they have a seat for an artist. I guess I'm filling. I'm the person that doesn't know what an easement is. You know, I ask those really out there questions, like, what are you talking about? But I think one reason they want an artist is because just to kind of bring in unexpected ideas maybe once in a while. And I thought one of the tricky things about the show was going to be not having an agenda, like not having the artists have the feeling that they had to illustrate the idea for the Land Trust. And the Land Trust, you know, to their credit, like right from the beginning, had a completely hands-off, you know, notion about the art. They didn't know what it was, and it was a leap of faith for them, because intentionally a very diverse group with mostly non-representational artists was selected so that it wouldn't end up just illustrating an idea. And like I said in my talk, it's the unexpected quality. The artists didn't know what they were going to come up with. You know, I think that from the outside sometimes it looks like artists are very intentional about what they're doing. And our training gives us an intentionality, but basically we don't know what we're going to do until it starts to make sense by the process of doing it. It's not the way most people, you know, really approach their work, the level of uncertainty. Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about the Depression-era programs to know how much people were sent out with an agenda. I guess in Vermont they were told, find the painted houses, but you know, certainly in the case of this show, as Tom said, we wanted the work to carry any message that was there, which was basically go out and look at the land, you know, spend time the land. I think part of what my hope was, it would just bring land and the land that's here into a conversation, just like we're having today. That's all I wanted, was like that it would be in the conversation, you know, and people would be more aware, because we're all so damn busy. Like, we live in this amazing place, and how often do we have time to get out and take a walk? And I just feel that if we don't have an emotional attachment that's based on really our sensory and emotional involvement with the place, we're not going to care about protecting it. That's what really worries me about global warming, is how children don't have what Brian said, that he was formed by the experience of going out onto those pieces of land that he found out later were industrial waste sites, but they seemed magical to him at the time. And everybody in this room, I'll bet, had that kind of connection as children to that kind of, you know, that just kind of extra land around them that we so don't have now. You know, so I think the biggest thing is get those kids outdoors to develop relationships with place. You know, I think that's essential.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And the industrial waste sites were magical.
Yeah.
It's not just that I was perceiving them as magical. They were. They absolutely were. All these little waste spaces are magical. And it's just, I mean, I think it takes somebody who takes time to carefully look and then present what they're seeing, to bring other people to that place, because it's so easy to disregard these spaces.
That's our job. Our job is to waste time like time you don't have to waste.
So one final question? It's not a question, it's a comment. I'm a docent at Shelburne Farms, and we are trained to tell people about the history and about the mission, educating for sustainability. But I find myself on that wagon because I warn them, you don't do something like this for free unless you're extraordinarily enthusiastic. Mm-hmm. And my goal is to make you as enthusiastic about Shelburne Farms as I am. So, fair warning. As we go down certain of the roads, past things that I have found aesthetically attractive. Now, it's not my job. Nobody has trained me to mention the aesthetics and all. But I point out, look at the sunlight filtering through the forest, our 400 acres of certifiably managed forest land. And look how it dapples this forest floor of Lone Tree Hill that's stretching away from us. I tell them that, and I said, it's not going to be on the exam. But by the same token, I'm forcing them to look, and paying attention is what it's all about, to this extraordinary beauty, which is and can be all around us if we care. Thank you.
Okay, one more? Yes. I'm just curious from this conversation, like even just what you were describing there, that, you know, it's all, what, you know, you describe that beauty, and then I wonder about the person that might be sitting there and they just can't see it, because we all see it in different ways. But, and then just how the panel talked about the wetland, you know, like sometimes we think of it as wasteland instead of wetland, and what a rich place it is. And I'm just curious if each of you could, or someone could speak to some of, you said you had 35 of your 38 paintings are in the show. So it makes me really curious what got left out. You know, so I'm just wondering, it's the landscape. How do we let, you know, what did you leave out perhaps? And then like your question, your comment of there's 4 hours of light that I can paint. So what happens? What does it look like when you're painting in the other 20 hours?
Well, they're all good hours. It's just that with, just practically speaking, the light, your compositions is all based on light and shadow. So it's just that when that shifts, you've got a whole nother composition. It's not that that other one isn't as good.
Right, so I'm just curious about some of the things that might have gotten left out, and why you left something out of for any of you, and what got left out of what you showed.
But that's what we do, is we are critical about ourselves, and you know, we have to, that's part of what we hope to develop over time, is a critical eye about our own work.
Yeah, no, I just think it's curious as the observer of what you're putting out there to also see what you left out. I can learn from it, but I also might see so much more in what you left out. You know, like but I love to hear what you said.
I feel like I left out quite a lot. And I feel like I had I saw it as a bit of a burden, because the Bolton Valley is the Land Trust flagship space, and they're so excited about the ski trails and the ski trails and the ski trails, and I have no interest in this. I love skiing, but I don't want to paint ski trails. I have no interest in it. And but it was interesting. The passion from the community was interesting, and their love for the connection that they had to the land through skiing was interesting. And so for me, I deliberately left out the entire world of ski trails, because I didn't want, it seemed contrived to me. You know, I don't want to tell we all know we love the ski trails, so we don't need to talk about that anymore. So I wanted to give a different perspective.
Yeah, that's good. That's what I mean.
I have something to add to that too. So I was given this Pine Island farm, and the sort of keystone of that is this Vermont Goat Collaborative, right? And the amazing stories of these people, who I interviewed many of them, and heard these, you know, often heartbreaking stories of their life, how they got there, and their re-engagement with the land and all that. But again, you know, I chose, that seemed sort of contrived, and who am I to go in and, you know, they should tell their stories, and they have in a lot of different forms. So I felt my job was to sort of look at the land, and partially because what I do is to present these spaces without humans present, or with me as the only human as the maker. So yeah, I intentionally left that out, and some people, you know, might have not felt like that was the right choice, but I did. And I mean, and just in terms of formal kind of image decisions, I think Susan spoke to that. You know, you have to trust your own developed eye. I left out 95% of the photographs that I took, and hours and hours of video. So.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by the Land Trust taking they had to take the leap of faith, because it was clear that the artists were going to do exactly what Brian and Gowri said. They're going to relate to what they felt had power for them, and not what the Land Trust saw as the most important part a story. I mean, the Bolton story was incredible. They raised over $1 million from people who just had a passionate, feeling about that land and preserved it. So every one of these properties had a really incredible backstory. But I knew the artists weren't going to deal with those backstories. I mean, and we shouldn't. That's not what we do. We for better or for worse, we have to intersect on a very intimate level with what we're going to produce. Yeah.
I left out a wonderful, a kind of a wholesomeness of all these families and this beautiful place, and I felt guilty that my painting, the one I chose for here especially, felt really moody and stormy and dark and kind of winter, and then combinations of seasons, and when it's still cold but the blossoms are blowing off, and so I didn't choose something that would seem like the orchard. So it was probably more selfishly about, I like they use the word intimate, but that's maybe nicer than selfish. But I had to go through the lens of my own, where I was at.